Hello survivors and welcome to First Aid Spray, a Resident Evil podcast by fans for fans. This is episode 6 of the show and today we'll be talking about Resident Evil 2, the board game, a project near and dear to all of us. My name is Psyniac, you can just call me Psy, and joining me on the panel this week, cool under fire, at least when there's no hunters around, it's Fire Button's Steve Valance.
Hello!
Recklessly intriguing, or intriguingly reckless, it's Adam Russell Reeves.
Just reckless.
The Resident Evil 2 board game has been made by him, but he was made in heaven. It's Steamforged own Sherwin Matthews.
Alright guys.
Sorry, that's a terrible intro, but it's the best I can do.
It's alright, I can live with that one. Well. Yeah, there's going to be like a whole bunch of kind of like Senpai Notice Me things with like heart eyes now looking at me.
Excellent.
That's fine.
This episode of the podcast is being recorded live in the First Aid Spray Discord server, which you can join now to hear unedited podcasts and contribute to the conversation in the text chat, as well as talk to us and other Resident Evil fans about the series. It's also a good place to put yourself forward for file readings, to appear in the show, and to ask questions for our bite-sized discussion segment. You can find a link to the server in the description of the podcast or on our social media accounts. Of course, we'll be starting with this week's edition of The News.
Alright then, top of the head then, our first bit of news. Laced Records have revealed 2 Resident Evil soundtrack LPs for the 2002 version of the remake and 1998 version of Resident Evil 2, which will be available in April.
I actually just double-checked the website. That headline is slightly wrong. Apparently they've pushed it back to May, but nonetheless, yeah.
I'll let you edit this then, Si. It will soon be available in May.
I'm not going to do that. Yeah, we'll be doing a sort of unboxing or whatever video for this because I pre-ordered these the day they went up. They're still available now if you're interested in picking them up. I don't believe they're limited edition if you're looking for just the classic black LPs, but there was coloured variants that are out of stock now, so I'll be doing a little video on them as I have started to sort of collect a little bit of vinyl. They're going for about €33, so if you're interested in collecting video game soundtracks on vinyl, which is kind of a rare commodity, I'd say Remake and Resident Evil 2, there's a pretty good pair of games. An odd choice in a way, but a good pair of games to have.
I'm going to say the aesthetics, isn't it? The Remake's red and the Resident Evil 2's blue, is that right?
Yes, that sounds right. And I think the Resident Evil 2, the sort of inner circle of the vinyls has like the ink ribbon kind of logo on it, so it kind of looks like that. And stuff like that. The fold-outs look wonderful, hence why I was like, yeah, we definitely should do a video and show these off.
Oh, that is cool. Do they still have the typos from the remake? Or is
I
that
guess,
too far?
Yeah, maybe we'll find out. Watch this space.
Okay, so our next bit of news then. Resident Evil's Nintendo Switch ports are releasing in May and are available for pre-order now. I believe this is remake Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil 4.
It is indeed. I think currently in the chat at the moment,
price of $1 million.
Yeah, I was just going to get into that. Am I the only person here with a Switch currently?
At the moment,
I have a Switch.
I got a Switch.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Anyone else interested in picking these up at all?
No.
I mean, I could always do
Because
another
they're
copy of Resident Evil 2.
They're so expensive, though. That's the problem.
Well, yeah, I was going to get into that. Unfortunately, there is no 2. It is the HD versions of Remake and 0. And it's Resident Evil 4, as it's been ported previously. A lot of the issue with this is the pricing. So if you're in the US, $30, people are a little bit annoyed about that in general, but the pricing is exactly the same. In the UK, it's £30, which is kind of nonsensical. Yeah.
One of those classic switcheroos. That sucks for you guys. I mean, $30 is still something I expected them to be about $20 each. 30 is pushing it. I might still go for Remake because I love Remake and having it on the Switch and being portable is nice.
Yeah, well, this is what I said when they first announced it. I made a tweet that said, you give me another chance to buy Remake, I'll do it. But I'm not doing it for £30. That is pretty much the amount of money sort of you would expect to pay if you bought Remake and 0 together on the PlayStation or the Xbox. And now they're expecting you to pay that price for just one of those games. And the problem with that is there's this thing about...
It's not a combination pack. It's sold individually.
They're all individually. And if you go on the eShop now, you can check to see the size of the games, which is a factor in this because they've got this, I can't remember what they call it, it's the Switch tax, I think is what they call it, which is basically,
Sorry.
Some games will be increased price on the Switch because of the cost that it takes to make the cartridge over a disc, because they tend to be a little bit more pricey to produce, which is fine because you've got all these different kind of cartridge sizes, and that will kind of denote how much it can fit on the cartridge, will denote how much the cartridge is going to take to produce. Therefore, you can figure out how much the game is going to cost to buy. The problem with that being there is no physical release, at least not in the UK. I think Japan might be getting some, maybe, but we're not getting any physical release. Same with Resident Evil Revelations when they came to the Switch. These aren't getting any physical releases, so why are we expected to pay such exorbitant prices, which were clearly put in place for the so-called Switch tax? It makes no sense to me. I'm a bit miffed about this, honestly, because any of these on the go would have been great, especially Remake, but now I'm totally turned off by the whole thing.
Yeah, it's weird to think that, I mean, it can't have cost them that much extra to port these over for the Switch. The Switch doesn't have any bizarre, like, extra features or anything that would enable them to be like, well, we had to put this much extra effort into porting it. So it is an odd, for such old games that have been sort of ported so many times now, it's very weird for them to put that price tag on it. I feel like at a like £10 or $10 lower price, you're probably going to sell more and make more money.
Yeah, it's true. Especially with a lot of the hype surrounding the franchise at the moment, people will be like, hey, I've never played these before, or hey, I haven't played them in forever, let's jump back into Resident Evil 4. But you're not going to pay £30 for a straight port of Resident Evil 4 on the Switch when you can pick it up on any other console for a third of the price or less at this point, probably.
Less, yeah, for sure. Maybe they'll do a bundle of the games for a decent price. I mean, hopefully, but we'll see.
Yeah, I won't be getting these unless they go on sale.
And of the three, one of them definitely isn't worth £30. I'm not trying to be funny, but Resident Evil Zero is too. That's too much. That's asking too much. I mean, I can sort of see it on a kind of, I'm a bit flush with cash today. I'll get Remake or I'll get 4, but Zero definitely is nowhere near worth it.
Yeah, that's kind of fair, I guess.
Resident Evil 2 has now surpassed 1 million sales on Steam, which is now more than Resident Evil 7. That's pretty amazing, actually.
It is, considering it's been out 2 months almost as of the time of recording, and Resident Evil 7 is, 2 years old? That's an insane difference.
The thing is it's very encouraging. I think it means that we are going to get, that we should probably see another title soon. I would expect they're probably going to, put it up their ladder of things to get done. And I expect that it will have the same sort of attention drawn to it in terms of from Capcom's end. So I hope that's a good thing. I hope it means we get some nice stuff.
You've got to factor in that Resident Evil 2 has been like a lot of people's radar since they initially announced it. A lot of people are straight on, I want this when it comes out. Whereas 7 was a little bit more, I'd say, niche. I mean, it went with a different camera angle, new plot, new characters. Might have turned a few people off, whereas Resi 2, we all know Leon and Claire, so maybe that has a factor. I don't know. Maybe that's just me being a bit nitpicky. It's
interesting. It's one of those things that almost in a way you kind of can't predict what's going to take off. And I think Resident Evil 7 generally had a pretty good response. But compared to Resident Evil 2 taking over social media for like a whole week, it was positively silent by comparison. Resident Evil 2 was just this, this juggernaut of all kinds of memes, and it was the hot game to stream and all kinds of stuff like that. And as we said previously, on a week that Kingdom Hearts 3 is also coming out, it really did go toe-to-toe with that game as well, which is pretty impressive. I don't think, if it's Resident Evil 3 next, and it's highly likely considering the success that it's had, I don't think that'll have quite the overwhelming sort of response in social media. I think this is a really special one-off kind of occasion with Resident Evil 2. But yeah, I would imagine they're going to look at this and move in that direction appropriately.
You say it's Resident Evil 3 next. We know it's actually going to be Gaiden.
Bring it on. Make it canon.
It's going to be the events of Resident Evil 3, but set on a cruise ship. It's going to be Resident Evil 3 Gaiden Edition.
Yeah. So our last bit of news then. Resident Evil as a franchise has now surpassed 90 million sales. I believe that makes it the best-selling Capcom series, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it has been for quite some time, but it's just a nice little landmark.
Is that higher than Monster Hunter?
Oh, yeah. Yes, yeah. But you have to imagine Resident Evil, as we speak now, is now 23 years old, so it's got, a little bit of a head start. Monster Hunter is definitely gaining on it. I know that much. I'm looking at the Wikipedia article here for the best-selling franchises, and it really isn't too far off, all things considered. So Monster Hunter, most likely going to get up to that in pretty due time. But this makes Resident Evil in the top 20 best-selling video game franchises of all time, if it wasn't already. And in the top 10, I believe, as pointed out by CVX Freak on Twitter, in terms of franchises made by Japanese developers. So that's pretty cool. Just a nice little fact to end the news, I suppose.
Mm.
Okay, cool. Well, with that all out of the way, we'll move on to our discussion of Resident Evil 2, the board game. And now, reading the file Mercenary's Diary from Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, Glenn Bolthwis, who you can follow on Twitter at YonShadyGlenn.
September 1st. Following 6 months of intensive training, my body's edge had returned. I was a good soldier, but they ordered my execution with no reason given. I was tortured and forced to give a false confession. But on the morning of my execution, a miracle happened. The company had helped me out, giving me a second lease on life. September 15th. I ended my vacation short and returned to the HQ office. It looks like my UBCS unit's been called into action. Umbrella maintains its own paramilitary unit to counter corporate terrorism and VIP abduction. In addition, they have nightmen who specialize in handling problems caused by illegal products. I'm currently a member of the latter. September 28th. Dawn's here, but we're still slugging through this nightmare. There are no provisions of any kind here. The undead walk the streets, feeding upon the flesh of the living. Given the choice again, I would rather have been executed. Death Row was a heavenly asylum compared to this place. I've chosen to pull the trigger myself, in the hope that my dead body won't come back to life.
So our main subject at hand on this particular episode is Resident Evil 2, the board game. It's a subject that's very important to all of us, because out of the four of us here, we've all kind of met each other or grown our friendships via that project. And in one in particular case, we're the creator of that project. But there you go. So for those of you who don't know what it is, and I know some of our audience is already familiar, we've mentioned it before because we're part of that community, but I'm sure we've got listeners that are more curious and may have missed the boat on it. Let me just quickly explain a few elements of it before we deep dive into our personal experiences. Resident Evil 2, the board game, is a cooperative survival horror game, 1 to 4 players, that closely follows the story, gameplay and design elements of the classic 1998 Resident Evil 2. Players take their characters through the streets of Raccoon City into the RPD in a bid to search for survivors, down into the sewers and the Umbrella-owned underground labs. The game is broken down into scenarios with specific layouts and objectives that familiarly reflect those found in the source material, and players can play any of them separately or as part of a campaign. The game still instills this survival horror fight or flight conundrum, much in the same way that the video game did. Items are scarce, enemies are tough, and Resident Evil 2 the board game has elements of unpredictability with the encounter table and the tension deck that can change the situation on a moment's notice. Resident Evil 2 the board game's Kickstarter launched on the 25th of September 2017 and got nearly twice its funding in the first day, finishing on 533% of its goal. The game is now out in retail for those of you that missed it, with additional expansions that are either out now or coming soon, depending on where you are. that offer more content, such as B-Files, which reflects the second scenario of the game and the stalking T-00 Tyrant, Survival Horror, which is a collection of new enemies, new playable characters, additional zombie sculpt, etc. There's 2 Malformations of G expansions, which bring every form of the William Birkin G mutation to the game with unique boss fights, and Fourth Survivor, a combination of PvP modes and a single player challenge, including Hunk and Tofu, of course. So, let's start from the top. And I want to ask everyone, maybe save Sherwin, what was your first experience with the Kickstarter? Where were you? Were you there on day one? Did you come a little bit later? Steve, how did you first hear about the board game?
So I'm probably, I'd imagine I'm going to be the misnomer here. I was very late. I was, I think we were like a week or maybe 2 weeks away from closing the actual initial Kickstarter. And I was just basically pinged by a friend who went, "Hey, Steve, you like Resident Evil, right? Check this out." And then I don't use Kickstarter more than once. And I basically went, "You know what? I've just been paid." And I just went all in. So yeah, and it was a case. The way I saw it was, I don't really play table. I haven't up until like now. I'm playing a bit more, but up until before, I haven't played many tabletop games. So the way I figured it was, if I can't play the game, I've at least got these really kick-ass looking sculpts and models. So I just went in on that. That was pretty much my first encounter. So
fair enough. Adam, were you there at day one?
Yes. Yeah, I was there day one. I had previously backed Steamforged Games' Dark Souls Kickstarter, so I got an email showing me that they were doing Resident Evil 2, and I got very excited. I was, I think, backer number 27, so I was in pretty early.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, I was pretty much all in from the get-go. I think I just put a bunch of money into it and just waited to see what went extra and just changed it after.
Yeah.
I think I started. I think I just threw in like nearly $500 just into my pledge, and I was just like, well, let's just see what happens, and I'll just change it to whatever we get to.
That's
so
nice. That must be nice.
It was money I was actually saving the money for the Batman Kickstarter by Monolith, but Resident Evil tempted me over too much, and I ended up doing that instead.
My experience with it was, I'm pretty sure there was a post. I don't even think it was it might have been like a mini trailer a few days or maybe a week beforehand that I just saw crop up on Facebook, I think. So I was there on day one, and I had a growing interest in tabletop stuff, but I'm fairly sure I went into it with, well, let's take a look at it, because I know what time it's going to launch, and just scroll through and have a look. And I wasn't really necessarily thinking too hard about backing it, but when I saw what it was, I'm pretty sure I was like backer 40 or something, so I was pretty early on it as well. It didn't take long to convert me, I guess. Yeah, and I wound up with everything from it by the end of it. I had to essentially scrape together money and beg friends, and was gifted stuff to get it all the expansions and all the exclusives. But my earliest memories is that, and hanging out in the Kickstarter comments, and then obviously the community that was born from that, which is how you and I met, Adam, because you made the Facebook group, which we'll talk about a bit more probably near the end. But you made the Facebook community. I came in there and was just endlessly posting stuff. So without asking me, you made me admin. And and it's just grown from there. Podcast really wouldn't exist without that. So that's kind of cool. And that's why we need to do a whole episode on it. So fast forward, I suppose, around about 2 years' time, the game begins shipping out to everybody.
How about we can we rewind a little bit?
Sure.
Because I would love to know how Sherwin found out about Resident Evil.
So Sherwin found out about Resident Evil. So let's rewind way back to probably about a year and a half before. No, probably about a year before the Kickstarter. And I was talking with Steamforge's creative director, my boss, a guy called Matt Hart. And he just casually dropped in. I don't think he knew the extent of my fandom at this stage. He just casually dropped into the conversation. Oh, we're going to make a Resident Evil game.
Sherwin's head goes.
No, Sherwin's head did exactly do that. And then I kind of looked at it and tried to keep as casually as I possibly could. Said, "Oh, okay, which one?" And he went, "Yeah, Resident Evil 2." And that's when the head explosion happened, right? Literally,
it would have been so much worse for you if he had said, Mila Jokovic.
This is kind of the thing that stopped me from losing my shit initially. And we got there, and we were actually driving up to the where were we going? I think we were going up to Manchester, up to HQ for some reason or another. And I by the time we got there, I'd managed to convince him. Where I think he was just kind of like, okay, so you're going to be lead developer for this, right? Because I just talked at him for about 4.5 hours solid about how much I loved the game, to the point where he just went, because at this point I wasn't actually involved in game development at all, and he kind of went, okay, so no, you can make that game because you seem to have an awful lot of ideas. Like at that point, stuff like how the ammunition dials work, for example. How originally Matt's concept had it as you had a dungeon master playing as the Umbrella character, and we kind of started off with that in terms of how enemies would move around and that sort of stuff. Matt had some initial ideas about an open play area and stuff, loads of different points, and so many times during that conversation, all of these are great ideas. This was just pure design territory where it's kind of just, if you can imagine, two game designers just sitting there riffing ideas at each other. Except one of these guys is like Mr. RE guy, and it's just like, nope, that doesn't fit. It's not on brand. Nope. Not doing it that way, Matt. It's not how it's going to work. But no, that's really my intro to what RE2 the game was. Other than the legendary story of the port where Matt kind of said, we get to HQ and Matt says, when we walk into the room, and I can't. Matt went off to whatever meeting he was. He spent about 10 minutes at that meeting, and the next thing he knows, I've appeared, and I've just drawn every single map from memory on graph paper. I'm like, look, this is how much I know. Look, we can do this. And he's kind of looking at it, and at that point, he kind of sees this crazy man in front of him and goes, sure.
He thinks I've made a mistake.
No, actually, no. Knowing my boss, it's actually, he just sat there and thought, this guy wants to run with this idea, so let's see where he gets to.
That's fantastic.
Because a lot part of, yes, the best thing about Steamforge, honestly, as a person from the inside that people might not be aware of, is the people I work with are incredibly. We have an awesome system within our company where if you have someone who has an amazing grasp of what that is and they want to take ownership of a game and they can really push it and do stuff with it, then they'll always have a voice in that creative process, and they'll always have the opportunity to kind of step forward and kind of prove that in some way, shape, or form. And that's kind of exactly where that happened for me. Honestly, so it's been good.
Nice. Well, let's jump to the game being out and being available now. As I said, it's 1 to 4 players. Personally, I've been playing it mostly with 4 people, but I want to hear other people's personal experiences with it. So, Adam, what's your experiences been with it? Have you been playing it solo, with friends, how many, so on and so forth?
I have gone through the first couple missions solo so far. I am trying to get anyone that kind of knows me outside of the podcast here knows that I am more of a miniature painter. I like to paint models, and I'm trying to get the whole set completely painted before I introduce it to my gaming group, just because I want it to look really nice, and also give me enough time that I'm so familiar with the game that we won't have that weird first play session where we sit there and just go through the book like however many times while we play. So my group play is limited, but I'm having a blast with the scenarios. I did the tutorial in less than 30 minutes. I think that's an S rank or something. I get like an infinite weapon for that. So yeah, I'm just having a good time with it and enjoying painting. I did sculpt a little hat onto the Tyrant, so I don't know if that upsets Sherwin or if it makes him happy, but
no, I'm a fan of the hat. That's fine. It's size, the one you need to watch out.
Yeah,
I know,
I'm coming to get that hat.
I'm going to wake up and it's going to be gone. So yeah, I think it's great. I love the sense of Resident Evil 2 that it brings. It really does feel like the game really well. I've played other video game board game ports before, and a lot of them feel somewhat generic. But this one really, really feels nice, and the components are all super nice. Just having a wonderful time painting the models. I will be posting into the Facebook group within the next few days my first painting tutorial, which will be the zombie Brad Vickers model, and hopefully I'll be posting more and more in the coming weeks for that. So
nice. Steve, how has your experience been? Because obviously we've had it a little bit longer than Adam now. I realise I should have probably pointed that out because him being in America,
I've
he's
not
had less time to
long,
play it.
right?
Yeah.
It's actually marginally similar to Adam, because obviously I do the whole YouTube bit, and I was planning on playing the board game for the channel, but I've played the first 5 scenarios, basically to get a feel for it, only in duos, me and my partner, my fiance. And obviously had a blast with it, but I then, there's a work colleague I know who's like really into his model painting, probably like Adam, bless him. And I've commissioned him, before I put them on camera, I'd rather get them all like dolled up and stuff. So I've had probably about roughly a week's worth of playtime on and off, but only like the first 5 scenarios to get a feel for it, and then I've shipped them off to my friends. So
Fair
it's
enough.
kind of limited, but I genuinely, first time round, I kind of felt like I was playing it wrong, if I want a better term, because I was like I didn't realise you could fire 3 shots on the handgun, say, at first, but I was doing it one at a time, and then I was like, oh, these zombies are getting on me really fast, and I'm not killing them. But I've since realised, just run and dodge, and then shoot when you have to, and it's feeling more like almost, I know it's not a speed run, but it feels like I'm playing a Resident Evil speed run in board game form, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, there is an element of, like I say, the fight or flightness. There is an element of pace to it. You can't just stand around because you're going to have some serious problems.
Definitely, and that's part of the reasons I think it's actually a very fantastic game.
So my experience with it turns out then that I probably had the most time with it. I played a little bit by myself when I got it, just because I couldn't help getting it all out and having a mess around and that kind of thing. But I knew very early on that I would be able to call on friends that have known about the project since its inception, because I wouldn't shut up about it, who would be interested to play. So mostly I've played it with 4 people, which has been really interesting, because obviously there's a slight change in dynamics there. The game does balance for it in its own way. But scenarios take a little bit longer in a way that you're all discussing what's best, which is kind of cool. I really am enjoying the cooperative aspect of it. As Adam said, getting a feel for the rules. We've had a few slip-ups. Most of those came from me memorizing old rules during the production of the game and not correctly, applying what had actually been changed in time. But we've played through all of the core game. Our most recent session was we played with the PvP modes, the Birkin and the Brian Irons PvP modes, and I think tomorrow we're sitting down and I'm probably going to set up some of the B files and we'll make our way through that. But what astounds me is just the amount of hours we've already put into it. Just to play through the core game, we had something like 4 sessions of about 5 or 6 hours ago, and maybe that's because we were scrutinizing a lot of, when it gets really tense situations and you're all 4 of you are talking about, I've got these, moves I can make, what's going to happen at the end of that phase, what unpredictable element could be thrown in, how are we going to get out of this one. When it gets really tense is when the game slows down, but in a really good way, because it's almost like playing the game where you, when something jumps out and you kind of pause as a reaction and you sit there for a second and think, okay, now I need to deal with this. It's kind of like what we're doing, but in board game form. Overall, I think it does emulate that original experience, and Adam said it as well. It feels like the board game. Steve, you said it feels like it, but a bit more speed run. That's probably the tension deck, I guess.
And that's just strange to say, isn't it? Speed running, but it's a board game, and you can take as long as you need to.
Well,
it's for the whole evading past enemies. You take your time to plan out your moves, don't you? With the tension deck, will dictate whether you get completely messed up, but it's better to always evade and move past and close doors, I feel, rather than engaging enemies, unless it's something sizable like a liquor. But
it's all about knowing the route as well, I guess, in that speed runway. You don't want to waste time going back and forth, because
Exactly,
that's where things start to go awry because you're spawning more stuff and running out of cards and stuff. Does anyone have any particular favorite aspects of the game, whether that's the sculpt, particular scenario designs, or any gameplay elements? Steve, start with you.
See, yeah, the main reason that drew me in the first place was obviously the sculpts, but there's something about the game now that it's been a little while since I played it, but I do distinctly remember walking into a room and like, oh, I'm fine. I'll roll the encounter die. Oh, there's a zombie. And now I've got to play the tension deck. Oh, now there's 3 zombies. And like the situation has gone from to and I love that about it because it's like you're never safe, and you always have to really, it's that element of randomness, but at the same time you've got to be quick and tactical. It's hard to put into words, but initially the sculpts, but now I just love the way the game actually plays. To nutshell it for you, basically.
Fair enough. Yeah, I agree with that. Would be one of mine as well. Is the fact that, like I say, we've gone through the core game already, but I'd happily play that over and over again because of the element of randomness. Like you say, most of the rooms you go into, you've got to roll for them and it's going to tell you what's in there. Then you have to draw a tension deck card at the end of your turn, and that could change everything as well. So those kind of elements, whilst you're kind of playing through the same maps and objectives, if you're playing through the game over and over and over again, there's lots of changes there. And that before you even take into account which characters you're playing as well, which further changes it. So there's a lot of variation possible. Adam, what are some of your favorite elements?
Definitely obviously to mimic you guys, the models. As a painter, it was super gratifying to get physical pieces of characters and certain pieces of like some of the zombies are. Some of them are based on the concept art. They have the pose. Like the female zombie is a very iconic, for me, piece of concept art, as well as the police officer kind of shambling towards you concept art. Both of those related really well to miniatures. Super gratifying to get hold of those and look at them and paint them. For me, it's the one more interesting thing about the game, which being someone who plays a fair amount of board games and games like this, is the campaign system of character unlocks. The way you progress through it, and if you choose to follow the campaign system, you can have Marvin on your team, or if you don't save him, then he's locked out. Same with Brad, there's a way to get him as a team member or to face him as a zombie. And that's not something you see in a lot of board games. A lot of board games go through the scenarios and you have X amount of characters you can choose from, and that never changes. And, so for me, it's that sense of progression I really love about this game. It definitely feels like, starting as such a limited character base and building up this roster of characters is a very exciting thought.
Indeed.
I'm going to say that's mostly survival horror expansion stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thinking about it,
yeah.
Which is probably the personal favourite of mine, if I'm honest. But
yeah, out of all the expansions.
Yeah, it's like Adam said, the optional things you can do and these like little achievements to unlock extra characters and like having a whole roster to unlock. It's very compelling.
Plus, to be fair, the survival horror one, whilst the core game has everything that you need to play in it, it adds so much more in general, because obviously the core game comes with a decent number of zombies, you've got the dogs and the lickers, and 2 boss fights. Whereas if you buy the survival horror expansion, you're then introducing like the spiders and the plants and stuff like that, which just to bulk it out. And it brings it closer to that original experience and offers more of a challenge if that's what you're looking for. Like, I'm sure many people who backed everything, I don't know, there are some people out there that did kind of like a pure run and didn't introduce any elements, but I'm sure most players were just like, yeah, I've bought everything, let's put everything in. And just like making a list of all these adjustments that you get to make by inserting the Gatling gun in this scenario and plants and crows and stuff. It gets crazy, but in look how much cool stuff I have way.
I say, with the way the rule books have been written and laid out, I kind of feel like it's built to be incremental, isn't it? So I think when it comes down to fully settling down and playing it, I'm probably going to do core game first, then core game with survival horror, then B-Files, then B-Files with survival horror, and so on.
Yeah, that's fair enough. One that I saw Sharky was doing when he's playing it, he's kind of separated it. So the 4 core players are kind of separated so that he'll play through the A game with Leon and Ada, I think, and then the B-Files with Claire and Kendo specifically. I was like, that's kind of cool in its own way. I hadn't even thought about that. But yeah, it's just another way to play. Adam, do you have any particular favourite expansions while we're on the subject?
I mean, you can't go wrong with Hunk and Tofu, everybody's favourite guys, simply because I feel like it adds... the Hunk and Tofu Fourth Survivor expansion is adding on a more specified solo game for you. I don't get too many chances to get my gaming group together, and we have a few other games that we play, so it's not often that I can sort of introduce another game to the mix. So it's nice to have I know you can play the main game solo, but to me, the Fourth Survivor is great because it is a dedicated solo experience. So, it's more of a challenge, and I really like that expansion a lot. I want to say, the survival horror expansion, but you guys have gone through that all already, and I don't need to add anything to that. That is probably the best expansion. But Fourth Survivor is excellent, and everybody loves Hunk. So
this is true, and also to be fair, there is more to it than that as well, because there's the multiplayer extra scenarios that are in that book,
right?
The battle game ones, which will
for sure,
which would be interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing exactly how that works, because that's kind of campaign based as well. So I'm interested to see how that works. If I had to pick one, I almost feel like at this point it needs to be brought up. I feel like it's come up in the podcast before, but unexplained, because it's a meme in the community and nowhere else. So obviously, as we've talked about before, everything from Resident Evil 2 pretty much is in this game. You'd be hard pressed to really find much that hasn't been found its way into the board game in some form. But over the course of the Kickstarter, there was various pieces that people were asking for that weren't included, like missing enemies, such as the crow and the moth. And there became a little bit of a campaign of sorts. The Kickstarter comments, indeed, filled up with some sort of weird cult of people typing hashtag praise the moth.
It's not weird. It's not weird.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I remember, my memory's terrible for like little details like this, but I have such a specific memory because I remember during that October, I was on holiday with some friends, and we were either coming back or we were on the road to somewhere, and we pulled into a petrol station, and I got an email, and I pulled it out, and it was an update from Steamforge to say that the moth was coming as an expansion to the board game. And I just remember like laughing so loud that was a thing, and it was acknowledging hashtag praise the moth. Just a wonderful little moment of the community starting something that became a reality. And yeah, got a little bit of love for that when I pull out the Murder from Above expansion and think it's pretty cool. Someone tried to make a t-shirt at one point.
It's nice. Yeah, there was a lot of stuff going around for that.
Good stuff. Does anyone have any particular... sorry, go on.
I wanted to call out my favorite thing of any board game. I have a weird thing about it, but it's doors. And the Resident Evil doors are great.
They are great.
I know they're exclusive, but you can find them out there. But the fact that they're not all just the same door and they are actually doors from Resident Evil is wonderful. I love them. I love my little doors.
It's true. And shout out to Obi from the Facebook group who's made the little app with all the sound effects. That's how we play now. Plug that into the speakers so that you can have the opening and closing door sounds appropriate to the door that you're opening. It's so ridiculous, but it's wonderful.
There's like 30 of them in there in our little box. It's like there's a load.
Yeah, there is a lot. There's 5 kinds split 30, so it's a pretty decent mix. Do you guys have any particular characters that you've enjoyed playing as the most so far? Starting with Adam.
So I played through my first with just the classic Leon Claire combination. I haven't branched out into any other of the models yet because if you don't paint the models, the dice rolls aren't good for them. So I have to wait till they're painted so they have good dice rolls.
That's
superstitious.
funnily enough. That's how I feel about Fourth Survivor. If you're not listening to the new Hunk theme from Remake 2, your run's not going to go as well.
Also, something that one of my friends used to do actually was a little bit of a sidebar, but he would play a lot of miniatures games very competitively, and he had a very competitive nature to him. And if his dice didn't roll well, he would put one of the dice in the freezer, and then he would line all his dice up like around the frozen dice as if they're like spectators, and then he would smash the frozen dice with a hammer and tell the other dice, this is what happens if you don't roll good. You couldn't do that. You couldn't do that with the Resident Evil dice because they're special dice, and you would run out. So don't do that, friends.
or do, because you just have to buy more, and it's more money for Steam Forge.
True, yeah.
What a 40k commissar.
That's amazing. Steve, any particular character preferences with your time with the game so far?
So I've only had hands on with 3. I've had to go with basic Claire, standard Claire, standard Leon, and Marvin. And Marvin, because damn, it's just durability is important. For a better term. And that matters a lot in the board game because I'm a silly bugger who tries to go for shots, misses, and then gets bit a lot. So it gels well with my Cavalier style. If I had to pick between Leon and Claire, probably Claire, because I'm normally a support guy, and Claire's skill obviously makes it so she's really good at that. And Leon's kind of just cool under fire, isn't he? That's his shoot while still in the same square. Yeah. So yeah, if I had to pick, it's a mixture of Claire and Marvin. More
That's
Marvin than
fair
Claire.
enough. Marvin is our MVP from our group, definitely. By chance, when I kind of just sat down with everyone and said, okay, these are the 4 base characters, choose them, I wound up with Claire, which is fine by me because she's my favourite character. So it just happened coincidentally. So she's the character I've played as most. But in terms of my favourite, that's difficult. I really like characters with particularly interesting abilities. So I'm tempted to say Ben for his ability to discard an item, put it at the bottom of the deck and draw something else. I really like that. But Ada's is also really good. She's really sort of balanced for if you're playing with some different kind of tactics. Since she has 2 abilities, she's the only base character to have 2, I think. But Ada is actually the most popular character on our server. I actually put up a weekly poll. This is something that we've got going on in the Discord server now, where I'm polling members of the community. And this week's was, which base character do you or would you most like to play as in Resident Evil 2, the board game? And Ada ran away with it. So it's fair to say I'm with the majority on that one, I guess.
So hers is
Everybody loves
tension
Ada.
deck stuff, isn't it? Oh,
Yeah, she has the ability to take a turn whenever, which is very appropriate. And
wait.
exactly. And also the ability to ignore a tension deck card, which is very, very, very useful until you wind up drawing something worse later, of course. But there you go, happens.
That's all the fun of it, is
not
knowing when you want to get rid of it.
Oh, then that's why I was...
favourite?
So that's an interesting one. Last time I was asked this, I said Annette because I'd just come out of testing Annette. She was the last character to get locked, and I'd just come out of testing her and was really happy with how she'd come out. But the one I keep coming back to whenever I've played since is Brad.
Interesting.
Because you could do crazy things with Brad that make no sense. And that's just... Brad breaks the game more than any other character. And I think I like using him for stress testing, if I'm entirely truthful. But it's also something so... It feels so characterful in my head. I'm perpetually playing that scene from Resident Evil 3 where you see him just shouting "scum" as he guns down zombies and then just runs past. That's all he does in the game. He never actually kills anything. He just runs away. It's super fun. I really like playing as Brad.
He can use his bullets as escape rolls, can't he? Something like that. Is that right?
Effectively, he can turn bullets into evade dice.
Ooh.
And when he evades 2 squares rather than 1.
So that's a character
He's the
that
ultimate speedrunner.
Yeah, that it could mean you could probably get like tactical speed moves if you're like, I'm on the last move of the turn, so if I try and run past and I have to evade and then fire a bullet and then sorry, my brain's doing the math. Like that's really cheeky.
Let's throw a couple other things into that as well. He also avoids intervening zombies or enemies and also corpses when he makes that 2-square move. So you can angle it. So if you don't want to make rolls for tripping over corpses and stuff, you can angle it so that you hit the evade and then just dash straight over it like Mario, just jumping over his head.
He's one of those characters.
Super Bradio.
Yeah. He's one of those characters that I look at and I'm like, I really want to try this out, but I'm also terrified of how badly it could potentially go if you slip up. It's the same thing with Sherry. It's like, she's so different and I kind of want to try it, but I don't really want to bring the whole scenario down if I do it wrong.
Yeah, but Sherry, you really feel it because as much as she's really good at what she does, you immediately miss having that the ability of being able to attack stuff.
Yeah, you feel like you're being babysat.
Kind of, but it's more so much you're fine. It's your allies just constantly going, you can't help us. Like we're trying to fight off all this stuff, and all you're doing is just running around, tagging along, so you get all of your bonuses. And thanks for that, Sherry. Thanks for that. It's but then we were trying to emulate that sense. I think we successfully emulated that sense where, as a Sherry player, every so often you've got to stop, crouch down, and hug your knees, and annoy the people playing because they have to wait for you to catch up.
So before we move on to our list of questions for Sherwin to answer from the community, which is the second portion of this discussion, we should wrap up with kind of what we started with, the community there. Do you guys have any particular memories of the community or favourite moments, whether that's seeing all the recent homebrew stuff that people have made or some of the stuff beforehand, just the random discussions that people would have in excitement for the board game leading up to this moment? Adam, you're admin, so why don't you go first?
Yeah, mine is probably definitely a bit more quote unquote behind the scenes enjoyment. I had a bit of back and forth with the Steamforge guys in the Dark Souls chat, and I had enjoyed conversing with them there when it was Kickstarter. So when Resident Evil popped up, I knew I wanted to sort of have a community around the game, and I know that Kickstarter comments aren't the best place just because they're not searchable and you can't have conversations that kind of come back and forth. So I decided to start the Facebook group, and I was lucky that Psy joined because he was really like a driving force for the group. Like I'm happy to have the group going, but Psy really like just pumps out the content, so that's great. And the Steamforge guys kind of all joined on, and I knew early on I didn't want them to have to worry about like, oh, this group, people are going to be hassling us. So I kind of tried to make it so that they didn't have to deal with any of the parts of this game, and if needed, we could go to them and say, hey, these are ideas or whatever. So, and they were very gracious with that. Sherwin, we talked to him a lot, and he's always super gracious about any ideas people have and stuff. So my favorite thing has been having a group and growing it to, we're over 1,000 members now, and people contribute, and there's really not a lot of drama in there, which is wonderful. Just having, being on the podcast, talking with Facebook Steve and talking with Sai, and we talk. We talk in our admin chat. We just talk every week. We just talk about random stuff, things we're enjoying, things to do with the group, and it's just been a blast. I've really enjoyed it. It's added to my hobby enjoyment vastly.
Yeah, absolutely. Mine's quite similar, I think. In a way, I almost kind of have nostalgia for those early days where it was all brand new and there was just, so much to speculate about on this and everyone getting really excited about all the new updates. But I love the the shift now that the game is out, seeing all the crazy stuff people are making, and I said that early on. I'm no painter. I don't see myself ever being like picking that up. But I just love every post of like painted models. I love staring at them, and being like, "That's so cool." It's been an interesting wild ride. And as I said at the top, the podcast wouldn't exist without it. And my love for Resident Evil has really grown with it at the same kind of time. So that's pretty cool. Steve, any particular fond memories of the community?
So, as I said earlier, I was like late to the bus on this one, wasn't I? But I think it was you, Si. You actually invited me onto the Facebook page, and I was kind of blown away.
Yeah,
I was blown away with like just how it's a Resident Evil community, and we're not all at each other's throats. How peaceful is this place? And then I think we're coming up to the heady days of the very deep political campaign of Licker versus Hunter. The memes were great. And explaining, someone was just explaining it, praised them off to me, and I just took the meme as most like, this is ridiculous. I love it. So yeah, just it's general camaraderie and people getting along. It was brilliant, as opposed to we've all seen Resi fan pages where they just evolve into requests for this or trying to like show how great they are. And it's fun. It's no fun. Whereas we've had genuine creativity, like Colin's little RE1 stuff and RE3 stuff. And it's always cool to see. And the kit bash stuff that people make is like, yeah, that is fantastic. Like someone showed, was it a Resident Evil 1 themed set they were building?
Yeah, that's pretty recent, and it looks amazing.
Some of the characters may or may not be a little OP. You, Jill.
But it's wonderful. It's wonderful to see those things.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing because it's just great seeing people make stuff.
Here's to you, community. And with that, we're going to move on to your questions. And now, reading the file Suicide Note from Resident Evil 2002, the Oracle Dragon from crimson-head.com, who you can follow on Twitter at the Oracle Dragon.
June 22nd, 1998. I had to do it. We ran from those things, helping each other to survive, but Robert... Robert started to show the symptoms. I had to do it. Those damn things are pure evil. There was no other way. He would have done the same if it were the other way around. After I put him out of his misery, I had to just put him in the bathroom. Now, I'm probably the last one. How could this happen? I'll never forgive myself for being part of this project. Eventually, I'll get what's coming to me, though. There's no way to escape from this nut house. It's just a matter of time now. Everything is set. All I need is a little courage to get it done. Knowing that I'll leave many things undone is regret beyond words. But this is better than just waiting to turn into one of them. Please. Please understand. And at least let me end my life as a person. Linda, please forgive me.
So this section is all about the community questions that have been put forward to Sherwin to answer. So before we get into those, I'm just going to quickly list some of the names. So special thanks to Mike Martin, Brian Sharkey, Colin Ryan, April Corbett, Joshua Darren, Lyle Alfred, Richard Green, Florian Wagner, Aurelian Petit, Michael Early, Nicholas Billy, Rich Garner, Simon Skeptic, Scott Rhodes, Kevin Flood, and anyone else I may have missed. I apologise, and I apologise if I got your name wrong. But let's roll right into it. Steve, why don't we start with you?
Okay then, Sherwin. So I think we've already covered this earlier on the podcast, but I have to officially ask it as part of the team. How did the project come about?
So, I mean, obviously, I can speak from my perspective, which I think I did already speak about, which was finding out about it during a trip up to HQ from the creative director of Steamforged. But in terms of the project before that, I believe that our creative director, Matt Back once again, he used to work for Capcom. He was actually a producer for Devil May Cry. And he obviously has friends in terms of the video game circles, which is one of the reasons why we get on quite so well with people. And I don't know whether Capcom approached us or we approached Capcom. That part I'm not familiar with, but I do know that's pretty much the original conversation would have happened there. So yeah, slightly roundabout way of saying it, but that's pretty much where it starts from. Is kind of that sort of link between the two companies, basically.
And so, you had said that you had asked him about, like, when he said, how about Resident Evil? And he mentioned Resident Evil 2 and you were super excited. Why Resident Evil 2 specifically, not the original game or any other game in the series? And was that something, Capcom maybe had a hand in, or...
I'm sure that was the case. By the time I became involved with the project, it was set as Resident Evil 2, and I did ask that at the time, and there were a couple of different reasons. That it would be disingenuous to pretend that we didn't know the remake was coming, which is obviously a fairly big reason for it, because obviously it lets you piggyback onto the hype of the re-release, and we knew that Resident Evil 2 is a massive fan favorite. I mean, arguably, it just is. It's the best game in the series. Screw you, Resident Evil 4 fans. And it's the best game in the series, and it's definitely one of the most beloved. I mean, even before remake landed, you could go on YouTube or Twitch or whatever, and you would find someone streaming them playing it. For example, like 20 years on, that's still happening, and I'm sure it's still happening now. It's just some of those people are playing remake, but that was really very much the reason why, sort of one of the first reasons. But the second reason is, the narrative for Resident Evil 2 is actually quite linear when you actually sort of boil it down and look at it, which makes it a great starting point and makes it a fairly, if you're building a Resident Evil engine, makes it very straightforward to do that, because you are going from point A to point B. For example, one of the things that came up quite a lot during the Kickstarter campaign was puzzles. And a lot of people saying, well, we really remember puzzles from Resident Evil 2. Yeah, we really like those to go in it. When you actually look at a lot of those puzzles, most of them are take item from point A to point B, and that's pretty much it. And that's really a lot of what the gameplay of Resident Evil 2, the original game, is you start off, and then this definitely happened as I sort of started creating sort of like storyboarding out and creating sort of various different points that which our game would actually play out through. You almost find yourself going in very set patterns as you move your way through the police station, even if you are, for example, going backwards and forwards maybe over some floors. Once you actually know what you're doing, it's actually quite straightforward. It's quite linear. So that kind of made it a very good game for that as well.
So we talked about our memories of the Kickstarter. How did it feel for you when the Kickstarter launched? Were you nervous at all, excited?
So I was very nervous, I think, is fair. If you can envision sitting there looking at a projector and watching a screen and so on, but in honesty, slightly wired, because obviously we did the live stream of the game with Matt, which is quite entertaining. But also because I'd literally just got off a plane half hour before that actual live stream, flying back into the country from. I'm going to say Belgium, I think that's where it was, where I just attended the Guild Ball World Team Championships. So effectively, I've just come back from the Guild Ball World Cup and literally just bundled into an Uber, drive across Manchester to get to HQ, jump straight out, literally stop, okay, put on the Kendo gun shop shirt, okay, let's go and sit in front of the camera now and live stream this game. And then pretty much that's that. And it was just blasting through that way. Didn't have time to stop and do anything. So it's really wired, I think, because of that. But at the same time, sitting there and very nervously kind of wondering what's happening with the numbers. So it was good. It felt good. I mean, their initial relief was fairly palpable. As soon as I saw the numbers go up and we hit our target, for example, and passed and started going afterwards. So there's that initial kind of, okay, guys, it's live. Someone jumps in on it, and of course, as we now know, Adam was in there immediately, and Yusai a few seconds after, I guess. So that's good. So it was a lot of fun.
Okay, so this could be a bit of an odd one, but what was the most difficult part of recreating the video game in game form?
So the most difficult thing is a lot of part of a lot part of game design when you're creating something based on an IP is it's trying to realize you're going to have several small victories and several small battles, and I'll qualify that a little bit. But the most important thing that you have when you're creating a product based on any license is that you have to kind of drill into. We've overused this statement before, so apologies to anybody who's listened to me talking about this. But our approach is very much you drill into the game and find out what the core DNA of that game is. So we had to kind of identify, what makes Resident Evil a Resident Evil experience? What is it? Is it the fact that you're running out of ammo? Is it that survival horror sense? Is it the tension jumping out things? Is it kind of the audio? Is it the soundtrack? Is it the combat mechanics? Is it any number of different things? And it's really a case of sometimes when you're establishing that, there are little bits and pieces you have to leave behind because they just simply don't work or they don't fit into what the game is that you envision. I know, for example, Resident Evil 2, where originally, when we were sort of designing it, I put some pictures on the Kickstarter updates of this, but my first attempt at a police station scenario was one big scenario that took about... Well, I speed run it. I speed run through it and did it in about 2 hours. But I can imagine players who don't necessarily know what they're doing. That's like a 5-6 hour game. If that makes sense, that was huge. And at that point, of course, we had save points, which kind of respawned you if you died and stuff. This is obviously very early development, and it's just a case of sometimes. I think the biggest change I had there, for example, was trying to keep the same sense of what the game was, but also knowing that we'd have to break it up into scenarios. That was probably the biggest challenge, I think, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, going on from that, sort of you talking about it being one big map at one point, which element or elements of the game had the biggest changes during development?
Obviously, we could talk about DICE, which we know was a thing that happened post-Kickstarter. There was a lot of feedback about the difficulty spike of what the DICE represented, and a few of you veterans will probably remember that. But from a pure design point of view, probably the biggest change was how corpse markers worked. Very early on, that kind of ties back into the idea I think I mentioned in the pre-chat, as it were. We originally had a dungeon master character, an umbrella player, who was controlling all of the zombies and all of the enemies. And that really sort of steered us a lot towards kind of the original concept that Matt came up with is the players are moving around and there's various different corpses dotted around, and the umbrella player chooses when to stand those corpses up and when to come after characters, but they aren't aware of it because they have line of sight and you can kind of creep up on people or break open doors and all sorts of bits and pieces like that. That we went away from relatively quickly, basically purely because I knew that was a misstep, purely on the basis that although I love the idea of a sort of Raccoon City RPG kind of game, it was also something where we knew a lot of our audience would be video gamers coming into this who aren't traditionally board gamers. And hey, if I sit down with a tabletop gamer and say, hey, one of you has to be a DM, then they immediately get that. If I say that to a bunch of video gamers, it's like, what's a DM? And there's kind of a discussion point there, which then obviously goes to the next progression, which is what? You mean I have to lose? I can't play with everybody else and win? And that kind of sucks. So we kind of went away from that. But probably the biggest and the disappointment I have the most about something we had to change was corpses. Originally with zombies, you could hit them a few times. They had 2 wounds. The first time you dropped off a wound, they dropped down and became a corpse marker. And whenever you were within a certain range of squares and you did a test, you had to roll a dice and see whether they stood back up again. That was really thematic, but caused us so many headaches in terms of so many extra tokens, so much for a crowded board space, so many extra dice rolls anytime a character did anything. It basically just really slowed everything down, detracted from the game experience to the point where we streamlined it through, and that's eventually what became the tough hide card.
So you were talking about enemies there for a second. Is there any particular enemy or boss that you were most excited to design?
The Moth.
Good answer.
So, I can actually tell you some anecdotal bit on the Moth. The Moth was he wasn't originally going to be in the game at all. That's the flowered mission from this podcast. Few gasps. The Moth originally was just something where, I mean, I've played Resident Evil 2. I'm guessing you guys have as well. I'm fairly confident of that. The Moth, it doesn't really do anything in the game. It just kind of sits on there. I'm guessing it was designed by the work experience kid or something, and they thought they'd put it in. It kind of just sits on the wall, and you run in the room, and it doesn't really. It just sort of flops about a bit, really, and that's it. And if for that very reason alone, there's no real gameplay to add to this thing. This doesn't really mean anything in our game, so we probably won't worry about it too much as design. And then, of course, the campaign kicked off and took us by such surprise. I remember jumping on a chat with our sculptor Russ and saying, "Okay, so we need to make a giant moth." And he kind of I could almost feel him rolling his eyes down. I could almost feel him rolling his eyes down the Skype. And he's like, "Okay, so tell me, what does a Resident Evil moth look like?" I'm like, "Okay, so like a normal moth, make it like 400% bigger, and then shrink the wings down so small that it would never be able to actually fly." And he's and he's going, "Oh, okay, so that's going to look ridiculous." I'm like, "Yes, welcome to me." And then, of course, I found this little YouTube clip of someone fighting it, which it's a moth. It takes about 10 seconds. I was like, "This is the thing we're making," and he just laughed at me. So, okay, I'll make your moth. I don't know. In all seriousness, I think the liquor, I was most happy with. I think it plays a lot like a liquor. It's a scary thing. We managed to get in the bit where it jumps at you and slashes you. We managed to get in the tongue. We managed to get the part where it sort of scuttles after you. I think the liquor, even though it's a fairly basic one, still feels like a fairly nice design. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it is accurate.
Definitely a stressful enemy. The fact that it just tails you is a great addition.
If you can't kill it there and then, you've got a nightmare.
Well, the liquor was purposely put. Well, it's useful that it appears where it does in the video game anyway, in the original video game. But the liquor purposely appears in the place it does in the board game because it forces players to realise you can't kill everything. So don't try. I would tell people this when I was doing demos to them, the game at Gen Con or various other places, and I'd sort of sit there and say, "Okay, so guys who start downstairs, you have to deal with the liquor, and that's going to require quite specialist tactics to be able to get past that. So just keep that in mind as you play." And of course, it teaches you basically to lure enemies into rooms, shut the door behind them, and then run away as quickly as you can. And the amount of times I've seen that no escape card come up and unleash the liquor the second after they've just shut the door in its face is truly incredible. It's really good. So,
well, speaking of fighting monsters, then was it difficult to differentiate the weapons so that they all felt accurate to the game, making them a bit different?
Yes and no. So I think the core weapons, yes. The shotgun, bowgun, grenade launcher, even handguns, all that stuff fell into place very, very quickly. The biggest challenge was the Gatling gun. The submachine gun we had a fairly good idea for, and the flamethrower kind of went through a bit of a confusing state, and then suddenly we just hit upon exactly how we wanted it to be, and it landed quite nicely. The spark shot and the Gatling gun were the challenging two.
So I remember the spark shot being that was late, wasn't it? Or am I misremembering?
No. It's the spark shot it's a late game addition, and it's weird, isn't it? It's one of those ones. It's one of the few elements of the Resident Evil 2 game I don't fully comprehend in terms of. It sounds so conceited. I don't mean it to. It's one of these. It's a grey area. It's almost witchcraft using the original spark shot. Because you can shoot a zombie with that, and the zombie doesn't care at all. And then you can hit Birkin with that, and it just saps a huge amount of his health. And I don't understand what the difference is. It's almost like the bigger the target you hit, the more damage it does, if that makes sense. It's almost like it's a percentage of its health or something along those lines. And I don't know the mechanics enough behind it. And unfortunately, Capcom couldn't tell us because guess what? All the people who worked on it have since moved on to other bits and pieces or whatever else. So it was something where I couldn't discern it. And the spark shot went through quite a few iterations of, it only works on bosses, or it does extra damage to bosses, or we even had subtypes for enemies and things at some point. But all of that was just adding so much extra complexity and so much extra stuff. We eventually landed on, well, hang on a minute, how about the whole thing? Like, how about when you just hit someone, it pushes them because it hits you. And that's exactly what it does in the game. It stuns an enemy and pushes them back a bit. So maybe we just do that. Although I will admit that the weird thing about it was that actually came out as a result of a typo on our playtest cards, because anybody who played the original game will know that the spark shot, you actually shoot someone with it and the impact of it shoots Claire backwards.
Like a recoil.
Exactly, and people misread that and thought it pushed the enemies. And we kind of went, okay, that works much better than the character having a recoil thing. Let's do that. I just jumped on it. So that was the one, I think. Those two weapons, the Gatling gun and the Spark Shot, are the most difficult ones.
Speaking about the play testing of the game, do you do all of that in-house, or do you actually have like groups of external play testers that you'll kind of like ask feedback for?
So we have obviously we do an awful lot of internal play testing with our QA team, and then we have like an internal group of Steamforge staff who sort of stay after they finish their normal jobs to hang out and play games and stuff, as well as obviously the development team as well. But we do have, I think for Resident Evil 2, we had, I'm going to say 3 external teams, I think, it's a little while ago now. I think we had 3 external teams, if memory serves, for Resident Evil 2. And yeah, we have various different ones for different games at any given time. And occasionally it's a case of just borrow some players from somewhere else to get a fresh set of eyes on the game, which is why it makes it difficult to say exactly what you have. Because one thing that we obviously like to test with these is we have one group who are really very much kind of, for want of a better term, those kind of fluffy, kind of characterful gamers who aren't necessarily looking for a super competitive game, but they just want to play the game, for the theme and enjoy it. We have other groups who are built around kind of, they love the ripping apart the core mechanics of things to try and understand how it works, what's under the hood. We have other groups who will main on one game and occasionally drop in another one for them to play test and see kind of, so we read the rule book and this bit didn't make sense to us because they haven't been involved from the beginning. So that's super useful to get their interpretation of things. Bits and pieces like that.
Interesting. So this is quite a nice question. What aspect of the board game are you most proud of?
That's tough. I can tell you the part I've enjoyed the most, purely because I think everybody involved with Resident Evil 2 really did a fantastic job of understanding what the game is they were working on and and just how to get it right. And it felt good to get it done. And I'm going to kind of lean into that and cheat a little bit. I think the best thing that anyone has said of our game was, I think it was Polygon, but the best thing that I've read about our game was that someone basically said this possibly emulates the original Resident Evil 2 better than the remake does. And I'm not going to get into whether that's accurate or not, and or necessarily anything else, but that was really high praise and that really hit home. So I think, I guess the bit I'm most proud of is, in a cop-out answer, is the way the community has embraced it and seems to really enjoy it.
Well, off the highs of what you're most proud of, are there any aspects that you are disappointed with?
Mechanically, I wish that special attacks were a bit tighter. I'd probably want to revisit those. I mean, I think they work. I don't think the Vigor Mortis card, for example, is a bad thing to have in the deck. And I don't think necessarily the frequency of how they work and so on is bad. I just think that there's probably a little bit more mileage we could have had to do some more characterful stuff with some of the enemies. A lot of it was a lot of Resident Evil was really kind of streamlined, to make it keep the game moving at quite a pace. It's quite a fast-paced game. We wanted it to be something where it wasn't burdened or slowed down by much. So I think special attacks is one area for me that perhaps we oversimplified, perhaps a fraction too much, and we could have walked back to get us perhaps a different experience. But I think that's, if I'm going to point to anything, that's probably the immediate one.
So I'm going to jump onto, unfortunately, another question where maybe is a bit more shaky ground, but a lot of people have spoken about the darkness on the tiles. Mm-hmm. What was the design philosophy behind that, as well as the door tokens, not the actual model doors, stairs and corpses? Was that like a Capcom thing to evoke like the darkness of the remake, or did tiles come out darker than anticipated, or is it something that you wanted them to look like?
So it's kind of a combination of all three, honestly. If I speak fairly frankly about it, I think the tiles came out a fraction darker than what we were expecting. However, I will kind of go away from that a little bit, or a fraction, by saying a lot of the tiles looked the way they do for the most part because I think it was best summed up by someone in, I believe it was the Facebook comments, but it could have been Kickstarter comments as well, which is, this isn't Disneyland. And I quite like that as a description, to be quite honest, because it is Resident Evil. It is supposed to be a very scary, it's supposed to be a very unhappy environment for a character to be in, like especially the remake, where it's a lot of areas are literally just pitch black and you have a torch. Some aspects of that, I think we definitely wanted that atmosphere. We definitely wanted to fit into our game. And one of the ways you do that is by conjuring up an area which is, your characters almost should feel, it's the contrast from light to dark areas. You should feel like you're running through a dark area to get from a light source to a light source, if that makes sense. You are literally just jumping from place to place, and that's safety. Almost a similar sort of philosophy to what you might have had. The game Alan Wake pushed that to its absolute extreme. If anyone's played that and you understand it, you really have that same sort of sense of Resident Evil, where you are literally doing that. And we wanted to evoke that feeling. Obviously, everything went through Capcom anyway. Obviously, nothing for Resident Evil 2, the board game, didn't go through Capcom. And we had a lot of chats with those guys about how to get the best sense of what the universe was, and how they saw the game as well as we did, for example, that sort of stuff. So I'd say a combination of all three.
Yeah, I would like to just throw it on the end of that. Actually, I was definitely, when I saw the proofs, I was kind of a bit bummed out about the darkness. But when I actually got the game in my hands, they actually weren't as dark as what I saw. So I think that they're fine with that.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here and say, after Remake 2's come out, I would argue that the tiles, they're not that dark. I don't get why people are kicking off so much, but that's just me personally, I think.
Yeah, I'm also in agreement, although I've been accused of sucking up already. So I think when you're playing the game, you're not. I mean, the tiles are designed to be generic on purpose, so they're reusable in as many different locations, and you don't really notice particularly what's on them while you're playing because you're more focused on the actual gameplay. So it never really struck me particularly. You kind of already answered this, but we did get someone asking who your favourite character is to play as at the moment. I don't know if maybe you want to give a runner-up, perhaps?
Sure. I mean, it's definitely at the moment it's Brad, but in truth, you're asking me to choose which one of my children's favourite. I'll tell you my least favourite, which is Sherry. I don't necessarily enjoy playing as Sherry very much. Weirdly, the one I think I've kind of is a strange runner-up to go with this is Advanced Claire. It's amazing how much change that Colt SAA actually makes to her damage output, and how it changes the way that she plays. And obviously, I guess the other guy I go with always is Kendo. I really love playing as Kendo. He's just so much fun. And part of me always wants that poor guy to actually live this time around. We get to have our revisionist bit of history and get him out.
Another question: what's your favourite expansion?
Retro Pack, without a second of doubt. The first time I saw the artwork for Retro Pack, I fell in love immediately. And I've never played the game without the Retro Pack. Never once. That said,
good to spoil this little secret, or
sorry,
are we good to spoil the little secret in the Retro Pack, or should we leave that?
No, I think we can probably spoil it. I mean, that was always the Retro Pack. I knew that was always there for the fans. It was always something where the Retro Pack was. It's literally it's there. If you played the original game, then you'll probably love the Retro Pack. And if you didn't, or you're a pure board gamer, the Retro Pack literally means nothing to you. And I completely understand and respect that. But we knew that there were little bits and pieces we could put in the Retro Pack to emulate that. And the putting in the Rebecca Chambers new recruit card as the 50th card you draw from the item deck felt very, very, very thematic to throw in there.
Oh yeah, 50 searches. Oh.
There you go.
Penny's just dropped. Yeah,
I remember having to explain that to our graphic designer because all of the cards, obviously in our deck, went in a very specific order, as you guys know, for the tutorial system we adopted for teaching people how to play. And I kind of went, okay, so we're not worried about doing that for the Retro Pack. And the guy's like, oh, thank God for that. Like, it was so much hassle trying to sort all those cards in order. And I'm like, except for this one. One has to go in there in the 50th position. He's just like, and he's kind of like, really? You're a madman. I'm like, trust me, they'll love it. Like, when they get it, they'll really get it.
That. Nobody knew until you just said that.
I know, it's depressing, isn't it? My it's that extra little bit of detail that you put in there.
I love it.
You say that, right? I said that to the guys at Gorilla when we went over to pitch Horizon Zero Dawn, and it's worth it for what their reaction alone. They were like, these guys really know what they're talking about when they have that level of detail in their games. So we're like, yeah, that's right. So yeah, that was cool.
What were your favorite ideas that didn't make it into the final version of the game?
That's a really good question. So obviously the corpse is going down and then remaining on the floor, if that makes sense. I like that quite a lot. It's a shame that we had to lose that one. And I do genuinely love the idea of an RPG, of a Resident Evil RPG set in Raccoon City. So that was
I'm waiting for you to write that one. I want the giant board.
Yeah, I know. I'll see what I can do.
Here's Raccoon City. It's the size of a house.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I remember we had one guy. I don't know what happened to him. We had one guy in the during the Kickstarter who was saying he was going to get 2 copies of the game and play A and B playthrough at the same time. Legend. I don't ever know.
I
what
remember
happened to that guy. Yeah, I don't know whether he's out there somewhere playing those two. If you are,
he's still playing it. He's out there still playing it.
I salute you if you are, because B-Files, as Si will find out very soon, is a hard mode way of playing the game.
Yeah, I'm seeing everyone's posts about what's the hardest scenario you did, and they're all, oh yeah, this in the B-Files. I'm like, oh, cool.
Yeah. B-Files is where it really switches on in terms of the difficulty. Like you can play through A-File and then you get there, and then B-Files is like, okay, so you played the game. Now we're going to throw stuff at you.
Yeah.
So I don't know what else was there. I mean, we originally had Ivies going on their sides and sort of whipping you as you run past and stuff. That was cool. Which again, removed for complexity's sake. Plus, we were running out of Ivy models, which is obviously one thing. So I think probably those bits off the top of my head. Again, we'll see where we get to.
So obviously, we want to know how you feel about the community. You've talked about it before, but someone specifically asks, well, how do you feel about the homebrewing that's going on now with people making their own maps, making their entire games based on the first Resident Evil, all kinds of pieces like different doors and walls and stuff. And someone asks, is there anything you've seen the community come up with that has made you go, damn, that's a good idea, why didn't I think of that?
Do you know, the honest answer to that is you guys got the damn, why didn't I think of that one with the ink ribbons and the typewriters. So originally, this came about of a slight miscommunication between Matt and I when we were first designing it. In Matt's head, always if the tension deck ran out, it would always be game over. That was just always in there. When I first sat down and started designing this, that wasn't the case. So by the time we get to Kickstarter, it isn't until. Well, actually, no, it's a lie. Let's rewind a fraction before we get to the Kickstarter, where we actually took the prototype to Capcom, and we sit down with a guy called Stefano, lovely guy, who's our kind of liaison, and I've just sort of talked them through. Okay, so this is Resident Evil, and it's ultimately the demo that we eventually ended up taking to Gen Con and various other shows. And I'm like, okay, so this is how it plays, and I'll teach you how to play the rules and stuff. And then Matt suddenly goes, by the way, if the tension deck runs out, it's game over. And I'm thinking, no, it isn't. That's not how it works. That's not how I've designed this. And then anyway, so fortunately enough, they managed to get through without the tension deck running out, but it put them a real pressure on them. So at that point, we realized, okay, so that's now how that has to be. And it's interesting because as the experienced Resident Evil veteran that I am, I never really put that much stock or interest in typewriters whatsoever or ink ribbons because, hey, if I play Resident Evil 2, I never save. I just burst through the whole thing and do that. So I never kind of designed it with any aspect of that. And it wasn't until the actual community was talking during the actual Kickstarter campaign asking us to put in ink ribbons and typewriters and stuff. And Steve, one of the guys I ended up working with a bit on this, called Steve Markson, one of our designers, we were kind of spitballing ideas around about how we could introduce them. And that's really where the two things got added together in terms of, oh yeah, we could use typewriters to reset the game and therefore reset the deck so that way you can keep going. And that's really the sort of birthplace of that. In terms of actual stuff I've seen, I mean, the community, I think it's awesome, the community that we have. I love our Resident Evil 2 community. You guys really are awesome, and it's really fun to see the different ideas you have come up with for RE3 and RE1, various other bits. Jill absolutely is busted as all hell. Just to confirm that in the game that you've designed there. But it's interesting seeing some of the stuff come up. I mean, I try to look at it when I have a bit of time, but at the same time, I'm also slightly hesitant to do it because I think some aspects of it, I like the fact that it's the fans kind of taking something and making it their own, and I almost don't want to necessarily sort of taint that, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I like the kind of the do-it-yourself kind of the DIY kind of approach of it, and I don't almost want to taint that too much with jumping in and adding comments here and there or pointers or anything.
Okay, so another question. Are there any plans to sell any Kickstarter exclusive items?
I don't know the answer to that question. Unfortunately, you'd need one of my guys in the marketing team or the sales team. I mean, I imagine I think at the moment we're literally just moving on the stock that we have of those things still, if that makes sense. I know that a couple of them appeared in the online store, but as some people in the community have correctly identified, that's just a case of, once you've shipped everything out, there's bits and pieces that you're left over with. And, we'd much rather fans out there get to play with the stuff rather than us kind of, have to sit on the shelf gathering dust kind of thing.
So there's your answer, go onto the web store.
Yeah, basically. But at the same time, I honestly couldn't tell you whether there's plans of that sort of stuff. We usually avoid doing that because obviously, they're Kickstarter exclusives for a reason. But, yeah.
So leading on from that, are you aware if there'll be any future expansions or any new sculpts, such as Sherry, Birkin, and Claire's vest, that's been done with other Steamforged products? Any chance of the original Hunk sculpt that was later changed appearing as an exclusive alternative in the future?
So Hunk, definitely not. That was a Capcom request to change Hunk to look the way he did. And that the older sculpt, unfortunately, won't be returning. That was something Capcom very specifically said. In terms of anything else, I mean, again, that's really for our production team rather than myself to answer. I know that... No, I probably shouldn't talk about that.
Oh,
I'll drop into there's no. At some point there is something maybe, but we'll see.
Oh, okay.
First stage spray exclusive. First stage spray exclusive.
Yeah, there very almost was.
There'll be something maybe. You heard it here first.
Yeah.
So, speaking of Capcom, what has the response been from Capcom on the reaction of the board game?
So, when we went to the Resident Evil launch event that was in London, I remember talking to you about this one, Si. I was pleasantly surprised to be chatting to some of the guys at Capcom there, Capcom Europe, and they told me basically that a whole bunch of them played it at lunchtime in Capcom. They have it, and they set it up, and they've played it a whole bunch of times, and they love it. Which is really nice, when Capcom are sort of saying this. I did see that the original Resident Evil 2 director actually has a set as well.
That's true, yeah.
Which was super cool. There was something so... If I have a favourite Resident Evil 2 moment, a Resident Evil 2 board game moment, it's a weird thing to know that the guy who made the game that I love now has the game that I made that apparently he loves. So that felt really, really good. But no, in truth, it's from everything that Capcom told us, they're really big fans. They know we're working with them for a little while now, and they know that we're extremely respectful of any of their properties and what they want us to do and stuff. And we know that we know how to play Resident Evil, we know how to emulate that, and they really appreciate the care we've taken with their games. So it seems good.
So. How successful has the game been thus far, and at what point will you know if there is enough support for additional RE games, if you can tell us?
In terms of the actual raw support, that part, I mean, in terms of the raw success of it, I mean, I know we're all extremely happy. We were slightly nervous with the Kickstarter, for example, going into it, going, well, this game's almost 20 years old. Will there be that much community? Will there be that many people out there who want to see that game? And that was mostly from a lot of the guys in sort of finances and production and stuff. And there's me quietly confident going, I think you'll be surprised, kind of thing. But no, we're extremely, extremely happy with the game, with the reception. I mean, everyone has been so super positive about it. It's been really, really nice to see. And it's lovely to see that people are asking us for to make another RE game. I think that support certainly seems to be there within the community. So
Nice. So Resident Evil 2 being your favorite game in the series. If
Ooh,
no,
no.
it's not. But
Or-
okay,
Oh, sorry, I apologize. That was
one of my
I
favorite
have a-
games for sure.
okay. Let's reword it. Since Resident Evil 2 is one of your favorite games in the series, would you want to be the lead on another entry in the series if it came about, or was that something you would prefer someone else to maybe head up?
I would probably kill whoever the individual who took it away from my cold dead fingers would be. And, quite frankly, so I could work on another RE game if that's the case. And to be fair, I don't think that anyone at Steamforge would try to do that either.
Excellent.
And Sai is laughing because he knows what my favourite game is.
I do indeed.
Gaiden.
You would not. Yes, I would kill to make a Resident Evil guiding game.
At this point, I would buy it as well.
It would be awesome.
Sherwin,
I agree.
Resident Evil Gaiden expansion exclusive here.
So cool.
So, with that being said, thank you again to everyone who asked questions. Nothing else remains for me but to thank our contributors. If you'd like to be part of the show, then please look into auditioning for our file readings. One way to get in touch is to email us at faspraypod@gmail.com. But of course, the best course of action is to join our Discord server, where you can also ask questions for the bite-sized discussion, discuss Resident Evil with us and other fans, and listen to the podcast live as it's being recorded. The link to the server is in the description of this podcast and also on our social media platforms. You can follow us on Twitter at faspraypod, on Instagram at faspraypod, and on Facebook at facebook.com/faspraypod. You can find this podcast on YouTube, Stitcher, Spotify, and iTunes. And if you enjoyed the show, then please do leave us an iTunes review if you can. It helps spread the word. Our next episode will be hot on the heels of this one, as we have had a few weeks between time, lots of things readjusting and schedule and such, but our next episode will be focusing on Rebecca Chambers in the first of our profile series, where we take a look at every appearance by a certain character. So looking forward to doing that one. Thank you to the panel. You can follow us all individually. I'm at Psyniac_123, Steve is at Firebutton Games, Sherwin is at Sherwin's Agenda, and you can find Adam on Facebook at facebook.com/Mr. Lucky Paint. And finally, thank you for listening, and have a good week. Yeah, everyone go around the room and say some words, please. Steve, say some words.
Yes, I can say some words. I actually really need to go to the toilet, so I'll be right back where you get test everyone else.
Adam, say some words.
Professional.
I do not need to go to the toilet. I'll wait till we start recording.
Sherwin, say some words.
Words, yes, words. Magnificent things.
Perfect.
There are many of them.
Yes. I do like the way that Facebook Steve, meanwhile, has muted his mic. I'm now concerned that he's actually recording this in the bathroom.
I also like Facebook Steve. FB stands for Fire Button, which is his YouTube channel, but I might just call him Facebook Steve from now on.
Now he's Facebook Steve.
I don't know. I see things. It's an abbreviation, right?
Sherwin, he's definitely Facebook Steve.
He's always been Facebook Steve.
Well, he's on Facebook, right? So, job done.
Ergo.
Yeah.
That must be what it is.
Come back, Facebook Steve. We need to record.
He's too busy on Facebook, as usual.
Well, I assume that's because he owns Facebook. He's actually a multi.
I'm professional, I'm back, I'm clean, and everything else. Right.
Right.
I just wash my hands, that's all.
No, it's fine. We were laughing about something completely unrelated. I promise.
Okay. Yeah.
We weren't laughing at you, Steve. We were laughing about you.
Oh.
Wow.
Well, at least let me know what the joke was.
Old man is out of touch with his audience, apparently, and
Yeah.
the other people on the show.
Your new name is Facebook Steve.
Why am I Facebook? What?
Because you're FB Steve, Facebook Steve.
Yeah. Christ, definitely.
Well, no, the answer is, do you have a Facebook account?
I do.
Then you're Facebook Steve.